Okay, well, I was in bed, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm only slightly ashamed to say it was one of those sort of fast twitch grab for the mobile phone to see what the outcome of the vote was. And I saw it, and I suppose disbelief combined with dread, combined with a fair degree of anger, and wrapped in surprise because honestly I'd called it completely incorrectly. I thought it would be a close shave for Remain, and hopefully a wake-up call for all the sort of arrogances and oversights of the Remainers. But no, it wasn't that. It was the other way around. And it was interesting because it was much more profound than any kind of electoral disappointment, comparing it with the election of Trump, for whom I wouldn't have voted in the US. I mean, that was tough, but these things have a cycle. They pass in time. This felt like a generational, if not a millennial, decision had been made, and I think and I would maintain for many of the wrong reasons, by virtue of the conduct of the campaign and the way that all played out. I'm the father of three children, two of whom weren't old enough to vote in the referendum, but were very close. One just coming up 18 and the other just coming up 16. And the passion with which they felt we should remain was extraordinary and indeed infectious. I'm from the north of England, and my mother, who's a resident in York, was fairly committed to voting Leave. She mistrusted particularly the then leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister, and based on that kind of personality politics, she was very much inclined to disbelieve their line and to vote Leave. I think probably in keeping with the general feeling in that part of the world. In addition, anyway, my kids spoke to her at some length and with great passion, and actually brought her round to the point of view that actually for her grandchildren, despite what she felt, she was going to vote Remain, and indeed she did, which I thought was indicative of the oversight of the thoughts of the people who are going to inherit the consequences of the UK's departure from the EU. Optimistic. And that is through gritted teeth, I have to say, and it's sort of born of what I hope is not a too Panglossian view of the fate of human history. I simply believe that we have to make the best of the situation we find ourselves in, for all its shortcomings. There's no way back, and I regret that bitterly. But I think that we owe it to ourselves and to our children and successive generations to ensure that those things that the European Union set out to do and to bring to humanity are effectively delivered in a lasting way. I think it's essentially correct to assert that there was a great sort of discontinuity, both political, economic, and to an extent cultural, between the people living, for want of a better phrase, inside the M25 and those without. But I think that it's important not to be too simplistic about drawing those lines and to understand it really in the broader context of what I think was the essential failure of the global neoliberal project. It's effective. I think the effective duplicity with which it was advanced as an economic cure-all that would ensure that wealth trickled down and opportunity trickled down and across and away from the sort of concentration points of global financial activity. And I think people, for many years we had in the UK a sort of light socialist regime under Tony Blair that promised that all of these benefits would accrue to the regions and to the sort of non-centralized parts of the country. And effectively that promise wasn't delivered on. And I believe that people eventually sort of sniffed that it was never going to happen, and that, perhaps I'm not putting in these terms, but the neoliberal project was just another manifestation of the same old finance capitalism that's been, kind of having its way with the global economy, in a significant way, a culture-defining way for the last 50 years or so. And it was merely another way of disguising that. And you only have to look at the the numbers, you follow the money in these cases, and you see the massively increasing division between the concentration of enormous wealth in a very small number of hands, the continued grinding poverty of people who are, below a necessary minimum, and a sort of middle class that is sort of pulled in one direction or another, largely dependent on opportunities that they sense. So I think that that's the case, and on a personal level, I know that I've been sort of guilty of that slightly blasé approach that one necessarily is exposed to in an environment like London. And I remember distinctly and slightly shamefacedly making the joke that I was more familiar with Dar es Salaam than I was with Croydon, in a sort of making a kind of joke of something like that. And I see that sort of underlying attitude was symptomatic of exactly what people in the end objected to. And the worst of it was, of course, that they then dressed that up in really dreadful prejudice against foreigners, for instance, and express it in that way. But I think that that oversight of the neoliberal project gave people the excuse to find reasons like that to reject the European project. Well, the first thing I'd like to see happen is to get rid of this sort of lazy Orwellian term Brexit, and I'd like to think about the sort of post-EU UK, and how we can be involved meaningfully in a European conversation and then a global conversation. I think the optimism that I feel around the possibilities for the post-EU UK and its contribution to the continent and the world, it's probably largely based on what I take to be the best of what has come out of the UK sort of culturally in the last 150 years. And that really revolves around those areas where we combine European sensibility with perhaps the American sort of common sense and straightforward action, particularly in areas around organisational activity. I think there's many positive things that happen in the UK around company organisation formation, accounting, transparency, reporting, governance, the way that you set up an effective charity, the way that you apply standards to communications, and so on and so forth. And I think that there are a lot of extremely powerful and useful and generalisable things that have been built up as areas of considerable experience and expertise in the UK that we could formulate and articulate perhaps more freely, I hesitate to say that, in a post-EU environment, and present to the world as effectively a kind of blueprint for best practice in many organisational fields. And that, I think, is the opportunity that we could very usefully exploit, and something that I'm interested in thinking about and developing. I'm not sure there have been many centuries since the end of the Roman Empire where the people of Europe haven't managed in one way or another to butcher each other more or less systematically, culminating perhaps in the sort of mega atrocities of the first half of the 20th century. One of the things that I feel that the European Union set out to do and has effectively done, despite its imperfections and inefficiencies, is to prevent that happening. And I think that if we manage to retain what that has shown us as a way of living together in the future, we will have salvaged something from what potentially is the wreckage of a bold project.